Okay, I just want to welcome Professor David Miller onto the show. Professor David Miller is an academic who the legal system was weaponized against him by the Zionist lobby in order to take him out. He won a landmark case in the United Kingdom, which demonstrated that anti-Zionism is not the same as anti-Semitism, and you can hold anti-Zionist beliefs in the United Kingdom without losing your job. And we're very appreciative of him winning that case. But in addition to that, obviously joining the show, he's also been analyzing the Iran war from a geopolitical perspective. Dr. David Miller, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to speak to you again. There's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. I want to speak to you about the negotiations, and one of the reasons I brought you on is because you kind of have a unique position, a distinct position, and we always like to hear different ideas and thoughts on this show. But before we get to that distinct position, what's your kind of overview of what's been happening in the war, and then we'll get to the negotiations.
Well, in the war, what happened was that the Iranians established dominance pretty sharply during the war. It looked in the first few days like they had taken out most of the eyes of the US across the region, including, of course, in the Zionist entity itself. But after a few days, if you remember, the Israelis and the Americans were saying all their air defenses have gone, they're slowing down their missiles, they're obviously running out of missiles. And then all of a sudden what happened, there was this complete turnaround where the Iranians unveiled completely new air defenses, started shooting down F-35s and F-15s, destroying C-130s on the ground. And of course, as we all knew who've been paying attention, they weren't slowing down the number of missiles because they were running out. They were slowing them down because they were bringing out more and more effective missiles, which didn't even need to bypass air defenses because it was mostly gone. So they established a dominance there. And at one point they said that Iran controlled the skies over occupied Palestine, which was like an amazing thing to say. And of course, what happened was that they forced the Americans to the negotiation table. The Americans wanted to negotiate from more or less day one. And they came to the negotiating table. And then, of course, things went slightly awry, which you might want to ask me about.
Exactly. So now let's get into the ceasefire. You didn't seem to be very pleased with the ceasefire. You were concerned about certain dynamics that were occurring in Iran. If you want to explain to the audience, what's your thoughts on that?
So look, I'm in Bristol in the UK. I'm not in Iran. I'm not Iranian. I'm a lad from Scotland, from Glasgow. But I do this show, Palestine Declassified, which, apart from other things, is broadcast on Press TV. I've been to Iran several times, and I speak to people in Iran. I have sources there. So what I'm saying here comes in part by being informed from speaking to people inside Iran, close to the negotiation process, actually. And so when it came to the negotiations, it looked, I mean, we were going into these negotiations with Iran having the upper hand and having established military dominance throughout the conflict, destroyed the entirety of US air defenses and radar, and also effectively closed down most of the bases across the region. And so the first sign that there was a problem here was this thing about the 10-point agreement. So it was said that there was a 10-point agreement which the Americans had accepted as the basis for a negotiation. Now, what that 10-point agreement was somewhat unclear, and the version which was given by the National Security Council of Iran a couple of days later did not, according to my sources, match the version which was given informally, not in writing, not signed off, informally to Witkoff by the Foreign Minister of Iran, Araghchi. And of course, there was a distinction there. So it began to look like the reformists in the negotiating team. Some of the negotiating team were reformists, not all of them. But Araghchi, Zarif, of course, his advisor, and others. It looked like they were beginning to think about giving away stuff which they had already guaranteed they wouldn't give away. They'd already left missiles off the 10 points, even the version which was given to Witkoff. But it then started to look like they were willing to negotiate on the Strait of Hormuz, on uranium enrichment, on the nuclear program, on evacuating the existing highly enriched uranium out of the country, and all of these things. Now, these are, of course, red lines and cannot be negotiated upon. And it looked like there was some treachery in the camp. And I believe that's what happened. And we saw that. Sorry, so you carry on.
Yeah, let me just ask you a question just before that, because I want to. So you're saying that the United States of America, sorry, that Iran basically had a list of 10 demands. They give it to Witkoff. Witkoff sees those 10 demands. And then at what point are you saying things change, though? It's not the reformists, according to your opinion. It's the Americans not basically changing the 10 points, correct?
No. What I'm saying is that the 10 points which were given directly to the Americans were not the same as the 10 points which were announced publicly by the National Security Council.
Understood. Okay,
Right.
so you believe that was changed by the negotiation team?
By the foreign minister, having direct one-to-one contacts with Witkoff, both through X, on posts on X, but also through text messages outside any formal process, effectively a back channel. I believe that's what happened. And that's, of course, what led to the idea that there could be significant compromises on the 10 points. Now, the 10 points were the basis for a forward negotiation, as the National Security Council put it, but it looked like some elements of the negotiating team were willing to accept many more deep compromises, which would not be acceptable to, first of all, the Iranian people, and second of all, to the leader, to the IRGC, etc. And I think
so just on that, because I want to speak about this in a second, but I just want to break it down for the audience because they're listening to this for the first time. So is that why possibly the Americans, JD Vance, is claiming there's 2 or 3 different versions? Because there's a version that we were posting online, there's a version from the National Security Council of Iran, and then there's essentially this version that you're saying, which is different, which was given by Abbas Araghchi to the American delegation.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and so of course this has been weaponized by the Americans to say, well, you can't trust the Iranians, they don't know what they think, etc., etc. Now that's obviously rubbish, right? But nevertheless, there was a division within the Iranian camp. Now, and that was symbolized by the tweet which are actually put out just the other day about the Strait of Hormuz, giving away Iranian sovereignty, apparently giving away Iranian sovereignty. Now, as I understand it, in the days since that, how long ago was that tweet? 3 or 4 days ago? In the days since then, there has been quite a significant pushback internally, which has resulted in there being a new position, which is that these things are not negotiable, that the Iranian nuclear program is not negotiable, uranium enrichment is not negotiable, and indeed the sovereignty, I believe, of Hormuz is not negotiable. And that's why we've seen in the last couple of days the IRGC announcing, actually, Hormuz is shut. The Americans have violated the ceasefire. They've boarded a boat, an Iranian boat. I think 2 boats now have been boarded or fired upon, and Hormuz is now shut. And so that's the Iranians moving back from the position that they were in before, or that they've been put in before, and we are now in, I think, a much more sustainable position where they're saying, look, the Americans have lost militarily, and they must make concessions. There's no point in having negotiations unless the Americans make concessions. Now, of course, the concessions would have to be around the nuclear program, the sovereignty of Hormuz, and indeed, let's remember one of the other demands, at least in one version of the 10 points, which is the removal of all US combat troops from the whole region. That's fundamental.
So I just want to go back to the first bit before, because we will talk about these specific points. But in terms of your position that there is some kind of dissension amongst the camp. So, and by the way, I'm not sure about this, and this is why I'm going to ask these questions, because it's something that's been floating in my mind. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of Zionists pushing this.
Sure.
And so for that reason, I'm unsure if this is in reality, or they're creating a division, or there is division and they're trying to expand on it. And so in terms of, you mentioned Abbas Araghchi, just to add credibility to your point, if you look at Abbas Araghchi's history, he was removed by President Raisi, and then he was reappointed by the current President Pezeshkian. So it seems like he is more aligned possibly with the reformists. That being said, another person who's part of the negotiation, probably one of the main negotiators, is Ghalibaf. Ghalibaf, without a doubt, is IRGC commander. He was supported by Mujtaba Khamenei. He's someone who's very hardline. Are you saying that he was also hoodwinked by these people, or you think he was also consorting with them according to your position?
Well, the question of Ghalibaf is a complex question. He has, in the last couple of days, come out with some very moderate statements in the good sense, in the sense that he's explained himself. There was a moment, there were 3 or 4 days where the Americans were running the narrative, and nobody from the National Security Council, from the Foreign Ministry, was actually filling in what was going on, what was the truth of the matter. And so people got very, very restive about that. People were out in the streets demonstrating about it. Some of the official newspapers and media outlets in Iran, once said to be close to the IRGC, etc., came out and criticised the Foreign Ministry and Arachi himself. Now, the question about where Ghalibaf is in relation to that, I'm not sure I can give a definitive answer on that just now. But clearly, he has a history, which is that he comes from the principalist side, the IRGC and all that, and he has also put some clear water between him and the kind of positions that Rachi has been coming out with in the last few days. So that's as far as I would go on that at present.
Okay. But why that's important is because quite clearly that he's kind of the main figurehead of these negotiations, possibly with Abbas Araghchi, maybe equally, or maybe he has a more higher position. And so if he's not involved in this kind of changing of the document, how could they have been like?
Well, because there was a 1-to-1 channel between Araghchi and Witkoff. 1-to-1 through text. This is my understanding. Text messages. Through posts on X, and indeed also, of course, Zarif's piece in Foreign Policy recently as well. So that was the way. And then when the Americans come, in bad faith, and they come in order to see what they can get. And the Americans, I'm told, couldn't quite believe the things which they were being offered, but they weren't even going to take them because they wanted to come out of it in the way that they did, because of course Trump is. Well, I mean, this is the guy who it said tried to get the nuclear codes flipped on Saturday night. So Trump didn't want that kind of thing. He wanted, as has been said, has been reported, he wants a settlement where it appears that he is the winner.
But based on what you're saying, they were conceding so much, so wouldn't he have been the winner anyway? According to Scott Ritter, sorry, go ahead.
Go on.
According to Scott Ritter, he claims, and this is why we're going to ask you, that during those negotiations, they were very close to a deal. Apparently, they were so close until J.D. Vance got a call to say, look, just cancel all the negotiations. And so apparently they were really close to a deal. If they were really close to a deal, are you saying this deal that they were really close to was so pro-America? And if it was, what did it consist of?
Well, so they were offering, as I said, they were offering concessions on Hormuz, on sovereignty. They were offering concessions on the nuclear program. I mean, this is not a surprise.
What are those concessions? I mean, sorry, you explained that, but I mean, okay, let's take one at a time. The Strait of Hormuz, Iran publicly has been saying they want complete control of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
You have the Americans who said that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
We want it to be controlled by us, possibly by some of the Gulf states. Iran is willing to control with Oman as well, but the Americans are saying they want some kind of control over it. So, Iran says that they want to charge a toll, and they want to use that toll in order to pay for the reparations of the destruction in Iran. So, what was the concession that was made from your understanding?
So in my understanding, allowing the tolls to be used for reparations is already a concession. Okay, but that might be a concession which people recognise as being possible.
Yeah,
because it would work out in the end. But no, the concession was over sovereignty, so that's one thing, right? The second concession was over the nuclear program.
But just on that, just before I go to the nuclear, actually, I really want to get into this. So when you say sovereignty, so you're saying Iran agreed to allow the United States of America to have some control over the Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not saying Iran agreed. I'm saying that the people who were negotiating
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, the negotiators.
we're making those concessions. Yes.
Wow, that's huge. So you're saying the negotiators are saying, sorry, the negotiators possibly had already conceded.
Some of the negotiators.
Yeah. Okay, okay. So we understand that. So okay, they got that concession. What was the one with the nuclear program?
So there's two things about nuclear. One is about enrichment, about whether they can continue to enrich, whether they would be allowed to enrich to 3.97 or not. And the other thing is the question of removing either removing the highly enriched uranium which they have, which the Americans have not been able to get, nor the Zionists, or in reprocessing it such that it is diluted down to 3.97. So that's some of the discussion, right? Now, it's my understanding that those kinds of things were being talked about by some of the negotiators. And those, of course, are red lines, and they couldn't possibly. And of course, now it's apparent that the position on that is firming up very markedly. And we've just seen, for example, this evening, a report on Press TV saying that this is completely off the table. It's not going to happen. It's a red line. And so we're seeing a sort of pushback internally so that they are taking a much more principled position, which I'm very pleased about.
But let's just break that down as well. So currently Iran has enriched uranium at 60%. They have about 400 kilograms of 60%. They have a large quantity at 20%. The Americans want them to go below 5% at a minimum, but Trump wants 0% enrichment.
Yeah.
So on the percentage, I did hear, to be honest, I've always heard that is very flexible about when it comes to enrichment. And I always thought that they would be willing to go down to like 3.67% or 3.89%. So what are you saying the concession is? They were willing to go down to 3.89%, or are you saying they were willing to go down to 0%?
I haven't heard less than 3.87 or 97, and so that's what the concessions. But let's remember that they made those kinds of concessions before the war started.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Truly extraordinary that they've done that. And now we're in a position, I think, where people are saying, well, no, we can't negotiate with these people because we can't trust them. And these things are red lines, and we will not negotiate with them on those questions. But let me just answer the question which was in there about Trump, about the win that he would get. Look, I think that even if there was something which was negotiated with the Iranians gave away far too much, and it was objectively a win for the Americans, it wouldn't be even the JCPOA. So it would be regarded by the Democrats as a failure by Trump, as that he had made concessions to Iran, but by that kind of logic, it would be a concession because he's moved a little bit while not moving very far. So that is the other issue, and of course the question consequent upon that is that there is no deal which will get past Congress. It simply isn't going to happen.
But just before we get to that, because I think that's an important component to speak about in a second. But the JCPOA, this deal, from my understanding, was better than the JCPOA because you're getting them down to 3.67%. Also, another component of the nuclear enrichment, and I want you to expand on this, is apparently the JCPOA allowed Iran to have unlimited enrichment as long as it's within that percentage. Apparently, this deal that was being negotiated was the Americans wanted a 20-year freeze on all enrichment from now. The Iranians already conceded, according to the negotiation team, to 5 years. Which I think is just shocking, but is that your understanding that this was another concession?
Well, that's what I've heard. I don't know any more detail than that, but that's what I've heard, yes.
That's been reported by mainstream media, that as well. Yeah. And so that was another concession. The percentage being rolled down was another one. And the other one was the dilution of the current stock, but that to be either diluted or sent to a third country. Was that another concession?
Yeah.
So, for Trump, this was a huge win. Why would I don't see how that would be worse than the JCPOA. That's better than the JCPOA.
Well, I mean, it'll never get past Congress, will it? That's the point. In the end.
I mean, that's fine. It won't, and we'll speak about that in a second. But in terms of from Trump's perspective, it's a major victory. So we've got the sovereignty, we've got the nuclear. Sorry, we've got the Strait, we've got the nuclear. The ballistics you mentioned wasn't even in there at all. What else was a major concession from your understanding in these negotiations?
Well, that's all I'm aware of. That's the key areas. But when you say the missiles wasn't in there, I mean, the Americans were talking about the missiles at the negotiations. and
Right.
that apparently, according to the document, they shouldn't have been. That was not allowed. That was to the extent that the Americans had agreed the 10-point plan as the basis for negotiations. That is, they hadn't agreed to the contents of the plan, but they had agreed it was basis for negotiation. Well, that simply ignored that, and they just ignored that.
But then the obvious question, right? If Iran capitulated during the negotiations, if they agreed to all of American demands, shared control of the Strait, a deal with the nuclear better than the JCPOA, even conversations about the ballistic, which is unfathomable. And I need to ask about the resistance as well. But why would America walk away from the table?
Well, I mean, because they were not interested. As far as I understand it, they were just not interested. I mean, they went and talked and they listened, and they were making, as the team said, unrealistic demands, and they weren't going to make any agreement. I mean, Trump, as you said, the call came through, and that's where we are. I mean, these people are not trustworthy. They can't be negotiated with, and that has to be the position that the Iranians take, because it's obvious.
So you're basically saying, okay, so another important element, the supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, who's very close to Ghalibaf. How would this even be ratified? Like, Abbas Araghchi can agree to a deal. Why would he agree, or how can he, in a processes perspective, how can he agree to a deal that would never been agreed upon by the IRGC, would never have been agreed upon by possibly Ghalibaf or Mujtaba Khamenei? Like, what is going on in terms of structurally how a deal can be agreed without, which is totally different to what was being relayed by the leadership?
Well, it's part of a process of trying to dilute and in fact, in the end, dissolve the Islamic Republic. That's what the reformists want, and they may not say that publicly, but that's what they want. And that is a real problem of internal treachery. And of course, that problem of internal treachery is exacerbated by the strategy adopted by the Zionists of assassinating as many of the principalists and revolutionaries as they can. Just 2 or 3 days before this happened, of course, the head of IRGC intelligence was assassinated by the Zionists. And that's the process. They killed Khamenei's dad, and his family as part of that process. They think that if they kill the principalists and the revolutionaries, that the reformists will have the upper hand. And that's part of this calculus.
I guess the real question on this is that if what you're saying is right, why is Abbas Araghchi still in the position that he's in?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay. And you mentioned that Congress would never ratify it. So if Congress would never ratify a deal that was kind of so for America, so for Israel, then you're basically saying there'll never ever be a deal, right?
Until they're forced into a deal. Yeah. So there's a triple lock here. One is that Trump is completely crazy, and who knows what the reason for that is, but we can speculate and argue about that. Second is Congress. That's the second lock. And the third lock is the Zionists. They won't adhere to any deal. And we saw that, didn't we, when the ceasefire came into place. And they're still, at this moment, bombing and occupying Lebanon. And so we will have no kind of deal because the components on the other side, the White House, Congress, the Zionists, can't be trusted, won't even be trusted by each other. And therefore, what has to happen is that they have to be defeated.
So I guess the situation here is I kind of gave you 3 kind of options, in the sense of there is a dissent between the reformists and the IRGC. The other option is that America is just creating this in order to get these people to fight. The other one is there is some disagreement, but they're trying to exacerbate it in order to cause division.
Sure.
What out of those 3, which one do you see to be?
Well, there is real division, and the CIA and the Mossad are working on that division. That's why they sent their people in. They flooded their people in on the 8th and 9th of January to burn down mosques and schools and libraries and assassinate people at random, including people on their own side. And that's how they see this. They think if they take out the entire leadership cadre of the Islamic Republic, then the reformists will have a possibility of toppling the government, and there will be a regime change. And that's, of course, what Trump appears to have thought was going to happen in the early days, where he said, "Oh, it's all over now. There'll be a change in government. The fantastic Iranian people and all that kind of stuff." That seems to have been a narrative which would be explained by that kind of idea of how things would work. And of course, that wasn't going to work. In fact, just the opposite happened. People came out in the streets in their hundreds of thousands for 42, 43 days and nights in order that there couldn't be any more Mossad interference and interlopers. And they've shown that the people of Iran have shown how they are the power in the land. That it's them who ultimately, not just the supreme leader, but them who guarantees the arguments that there should be no ceasefire, which is what they were arguing in the streets, that there should be no concessions, etc. So that's perfectly clear as, in the process we've seen, is that the people have pushed back, the IRGC has pushed back, and there's been a very hard internal fight in the last 5 days, which seems to be bearing fruit now.
So I've got, like, a friend of mine kind of has this theory that the reformists are basically working with the Americans, working with the Israelis, possibly even the Chinese, various others. And basically this is why the IRGC has been separated from these negotiations. This is why maybe some IRGC members have been taken out. It seems that you're suggesting something similar, but from a different angle.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me if there were some kind of contacts like that, but certainly that's the strategy of the Zionists, is to degrade the leadership of the revolutionaries, the principalists, and to try and promote those different reformists who will do effectively their bidding. Now, of course, that's looking back on it now that we know about the pager operation in Lebanon. Who is it that now believes that Raisi and the then foreign minister were not effectively assassinated by Israel? And in place came a new reformist president who was much more amenable to the Zionist interests and American interests than was the previous one.
Yeah, no, I thought from day one he was assassinated. It was very clear. People didn't want to hear it on the day one, but I think they're more amiable to hear it from a year or 2 years later. But I'm in agreement about that one. I guess based on your theory, just to kind of wrap it up before we talk about other aspects, is the bit that I think is, for me, the disconnect is Galibaf, is the fact that you had a large number of personnel there, some who are extreme hardliners, who went to the delegation in Islamabad. I just can't see a scenario where some of these deals or some of these basically concessions were slipped through without anyone realizing. That's the bit that I think I can't square that circle.
Sure. Well, I mean, my view on that is that that there were several people in that negotiating team who were reformists, and of course there are different stripes of reformists, as well as there being people who were dedicated principalists. But as I said, it's my understanding that there were direct one-to-one communications between Arakchi and Witkoff, who, remember, wasn't in Islamabad as far as I understand it. And it was them, through text messages and through tweets on X, that some of these concessions were fleshed out. And there was, as I understand it, this was not done in writing. There was no in-writing agreement with Witkoff's signature on it and Arakchi's signature on it to say that they had made these agreements. And that, of course, meant that they had nothing to negotiate on.
Okay. And just coming back to the point now, your position is that over the last day or two, things have changed. What's your thoughts on the delegation to Pakistan? They were meant to go today. I believe, according to the latest reports we're hearing, that meeting has now allegedly possibly cancelled. Iran isn't sending the delegation. Kushner, Witkoff, and Vance are likely not going. Is this based on, once again, this change of perspective, or is it that they continue to hold the position that you did not remove the blockade, we are not going? Because yesterday we heard very late that there was a possibility they were going to go even without the blockade being removed.
Yeah, no, I don't know about that. But it does appear that the response of the Islamic Republic to these ceasefire violations has been much more principled. And of course, the horror that many people in Iran saw happening in Lebanon and what people feared was the abandonment of the resistance, the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, I think has chastened a lot of opinion in relevant places in Iran. And so I think we're seeing the rediscovery of the principled line, which of course was that they couldn't and wouldn't and should not, and I believe will not, abandon Hezbollah.
Okay. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the questions I had, but I forgot. In terms of the negotiation, resistance, what was the conversations about the resistance? Would they abandon the resistance? Would the resistance be dismantled? What would occur in terms of the resistance in Lebanon, the resistance in Yemen, the resistance in these different regions, Iraq?
I'm not aware that there were concessions made, significant concessions made in relation to that. Obviously, the Americans wanted that, but Iran can't make those concessions.
Okay. And now what we've got is, do you think the war is going to restart? What do you think happens from now? Because it seems like there's not going to be any negotiations, although I'm not fully sure what's going on. We've just seen so much. Like, my position on this is this, right? I obviously have a different opinion to you, but I was very impressed with Iran up until the ceasefire. I felt like every decision was on point. The only way you defeat the US is by executing a perfect game plan. And it was almost perfect. And the Americans made so many mistakes.
Yeah.
You were basically in a perfect situation. I was against the ceasefire. I thought it was a terrible decision. But that being said, there's been a lot of mistakes in this ceasefire, a lot of letting America take control over the situation.
Yep.
If you look at the narrative, America was able, and Israel was able to control the narrative. They were able to manipulate the stock market. The Iranians were always too late to respond in this. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you on that. I mean, I didn't understand why they would want a ceasefire. I don't know. I mean, look, the difficulty here in a lot of this period is what to believe, because you mentioned Scott Ritter the other day, but there's an AI version of Scott Ritter out there doing broadcasts, and you have all sorts of stuff being said online which is manifestly nonsense, and so you hear people saying, oh, they've already arrived in Islamabad. No, they're not going to Islamabad. Oh, these missiles never hit their targets. Oh, these missiles hit all the targets. So there's a huge amount of verbiage you've got to get through to have any basis for understanding what's going on. It's very difficult to work out. As you say, are they in Islamabad? Are they going to go? What's actually happening? So that's very difficult. So I think people need to kind of hold their breath a little bit and try and find reliable information, and that's not always easy.
So let me ask you about the new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. Where would you categorize him? Would you categorize him as more of a reformist, more of a IAGC hardliner? I mean, I would. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't like the term hardliner. I think that's that's kind of lines that come from the West. But look, he's not a reformist. He is very much a principlist. He comes from a religious background in the same way as his father did, and that's his whole life has been leading up to this process. Now he, as I understand it, is less likely to be give concessions than his father on questions like the nuclear question.
Right.
But let's see if that happens. I mean, look, what's happened in the last 47 years of sanctions and attempts to destroy the Islamic Republic since the revolution is that Iran has become the world's leading, perhaps bar China, leading designer and manufacturer of missiles. The missiles which they have, if the hypersonic missiles in particular, the Americans and the Zionists and the British don't have any hypersonic missiles. They simply don't have any, and that's why the power projection of the US through its navy, through the what is it, 3 aircraft carriers that are now in the region, has just sort of dissolved into the sea. These have become simply metal targets for the advanced missiles that Iran has produced, and that is these have been produced. amongst the world's most advanced missile technology, in a context where the whole world practically has been trying to sanction them. So that's an immense achievement, and people should understand that. And that's why you hear some people on the kind of liberal end of the American spectrum saying, well, you've got to understand this is not Iraq, it's not Lebanon, that this is a country that's very, very large, it's been there for a very long time, and you can't just destroy it. And you've got to understand what's happening here, rather than just simply thinking that you can change the regime like you've done in Libya or Afghanistan or wherever else.
So I guess my question to you is this: from your understanding, what would be, like, you could never have a deal which is completely what you want. You'll never get it. Well, it looks like they did almost get that, but logically speaking, the Americans don't get a deal which is maximalist from their perspective, and Iran wouldn't get a deal which is maximalist from their perspective. So what deal do you think would be an appropriate deal where you didn't have so many concessions, but it would be a major victory for Iran?
Well, I mean, my view all the way through this and before is that there can be no peace, no meaningful peace in West Asia while there remains a Zionist colony. The Zionist colony must be removed, it must be collapsed, because otherwise, in 5 years, or in 2 weeks, or in 3 weeks, or in 5 years, the Zionists will be attempting to take more territory in Lebanon, or Syria, or Egypt, or Jordan, or wherever it is that they decide to colonize next. And that's because the Zionists can't do anything else than do that. That is what Zionism is for. Zionism is for land theft and ethnic cleansing and genocide. And so the only way to stop that is to collapse the colony and to make Israel Palestine again. And that, I think, is the key question. So all the other questions are subsidiary to that. The question of the role of the US in the region, of course, is important and abuts that, because, of course, the Zionists and the Americans have their allies in the region, most obviously the UAE, but also Bahrain and the Saudis and Jordan and now actually, of course, also Syria and Lebanon. And all of that has to change. So we have to see, the UAE becomes Oman again, and all sorts of changes have to happen in the region. So I believe that the maximalist position is that we see the Americans out of the whole region, we see the collapse of the Zionist colony, we see the redrawing of borders so that they are meaningful in the region, and that's the basis for peace. Now, if you ask me, what would I accept? It's not, of course, not to do with me. I don't live there. It's not my region. The people of the region will decide what happens, but it requires quite a significant amount of change, and it requires, in the end, a military defeat inflicted upon the Americans and the Zionists, which will be historic. Historic of the kind, in fact, even more historic than the kind where you saw the helicopters on the roof of the American embassy in South Vietnam taking off as the Vietnamese Communist Party, the guerrillas of the NLF, closed in around their territory. That's what we're seeing. I mean, that's called a defeat. And that's what we need. We need that kind of defeat. And I believe that there are many now and all the way through this, actually, in the IRGC who have always known that that's what has to happen. And the question is only, at what point do we go for the final mile?
Okay. And from your perspective, what do you think happens from now?
Well, we don't know, do we? I mean, if there are negotiations, we don't know if that's going to be the case. Who knows what can come out of it? But as we've been saying, I don't believe that the Americans are acting in good faith, and that even if they were acting in good faith, that no deal will be ratified by Congress. It won't get to the United Nations Security Council. The Zionists will continue to kill as many civilians as possible and build new military bases in Lebanon and indeed Syria. So all of these things, that's what all of that will happen. There cannot be a meaningful peace. It will be an armed peace which will break down sooner rather than later.
Yeah, let's see. And Professor Miller, last question to you. From this perspective, you believe that there's a lot more unity amongst these different factions. How long do you think something like that could persist?
Well, I think the question is, well, what will happen if there is found to have been treachery? If that's the case, then we already saw, didn't we, stories way back about Zarif and others being put under house arrest. Now, that's not an impossible scenario. And if there has been treachery, then of course that's what should happen. You put traitors in jail. And you sentence them using the powers available to you under the law. And that's what we should be doing everywhere. In fact, I think, we should be doing quite a lot more finding traitors who are undermining the national sovereignty of Iran or the UK or the US for that matter. So I think it's perfectly clear what should happen if that's found to have been the case.
But just on that though, what's the kind of, I understand your perspective on like what the ideal situation is, and that makes sense to me. But the issue is, okay, that's the ideal situation, but what's the kind of more realistic situation? And what I mean by that is, of course, you want the dismantling of Israel. You want the Americans to be removed from the region. You want these Gulf states to kind of, the borders to change in the Gulf states and various other things. I mean, that's ideal, but I mean, what would be a deal that would be from, because let's be clear on this. Humans are humans. We can sit here and say, look, we want this, we want that. This would be the ideal situation. But there's going to come a point where people from Iran won't be able to continue with the situation. They'll start getting a bit agitated. Things will not be as great. You know how it is. Humans are very fickle when it comes to these things. And so at some point, there's going to be pressures. Now, it might take a lot more longer with the Iranian people compared to others, but this is going to happen. This is human society. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you could have had a really good deal and you said no to that, and afterwards, you never get the deal. So I guess I'm asking, from a realistic perspective, like what would be a deal from Iran's perspective that would be good for the Iranian people without something maximalist as per what you just said?
Well, I mean, when you say human society and people are fickle, and you did make the nod to the Iranian people, Iran is not like the UK or the US. Simply isn't like that. And the kind of pressure which would come on the government is not like you would think. And in fact, the pressure, as we saw in the last 45 days or so, is the pressure is for there to be no ceasefire, no concessions.
True.
And that's the word on the streets and squares of Tabriz and Qom and Isfahan and Tehran. Now, that's completely different to what would happen in this country, where there might be a little bit of a march and we might all go on it. But the pressure from the streets is quite significant. Let's also remember that the people in the IRGC and indeed the army, the Iranian army, and the Basij, the volunteers who keep order along with the police in Iran, they are people who are inculcated with a very deep religious and ideological understanding of the world, and so that's one way of me saying to you, look, the question is not what I think would be maximalist or what would be the best. The question is what they think would be appropriate, and when they decide. So it's not a question of kind of war weariness or something. It's a question of when people decide, by whatever process, that this is the most we can get, and this far no further. That's not for me to say.
For sure. Dr. Miller, thank you so much for taking your time out to join us. We really appreciate you. Where can people find you? You've got a regular show you do, right?
Yes, Palestine Declassified, which is a podcast which the British government is trying to shut down. So make sure you watch it before they do it any further. And I'm on X as Tracking Power, and I have a Substack under the same title. So please, if people like what I do, please come and support me. Send me a couple of quid, that kind of thing.
Brilliant. And you've also on X as well, which is Tracking_Power.
Yeah.
So people can follow you on that as well, because you are giving analysis on what's happening with the war. We'll put that tweet in the net so people can actually follow you there. But appreciate you taking your time out to join us. We always do appreciate having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Professor Miller. Thank you so much for him. Thanks for the fact that he joined us. We really do appreciate it. guys, if you can do me a favor, do make sure you give Professor Miller a follow. And also make sure you comment on this video. Make sure you like it. Make sure you share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. Subscribe. You're seeing many pro-Iranian accounts, many accounts giving information from Iran being banned on X. This is why we're trying to expand onto other platforms. We're going to put a Discord out later as well, because we know what's happening. Unfortunately, we don't know. We hope our time isn't numbered, but all of these things may happen. So therefore, if you can do me a favor, like this, subscribe to this channel, have your notifications on, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. He has a very distinct opinion and view, quite controversial. He thinks there may have been some kind of dissension in the camp between the reformists and the IRGC. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? Do you think there were some gaps in his information? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe. Like.